So welcome everybody to our webinar about NGINX Unit from zero to liftoff. So first of all, I want to introduce ourselves. So basically me and Valentin. Valentin, please introduce yourself shortly.
Hello everyone, I'm Valentin Bartinev. I'm team lead of NGINX Unit, and I'm here to help Timo with questions and the technical part. Timo?
Perfect, thanks. Yeah, thanks, Valentin. My name is Timo Stark, and I'm a professional services engineer from NGINX. And together we are having this honor today to present you a little bit about NGINX Unit. So you see here we have a brief agenda here, a little bit bigger. So first of all, this is a very dynamically webinar. So in case you have any questions or in case you want to learn anything specifically, please feel free to ask anything. So this is what we want. We are not in a position talking about the things we think that you're interested in. So please feel free to ask any questions you have. And let's create a very good webinar for us. Besides from that, we have prepared a little bit of an agenda here. So first of all, we want to go into what is NGINX Unit and what are the history about NGINX Unit. I think Valentin can talk a little bit about the history of it. So then we want to show the very basic concepts about NGINX Unit. So how to configure, how to install, what are the different options we have for deploying applications and installing it. Third, we have prepared a couple of demos. We have a PHP application, WordPress. We have a Node.js based or Express based API, a little Python app with Django. So a couple of demos here we can dive into. And at the end we can publish the references to the NGINX GitHub repository, so they can have a look after the webinar and check our sources. Right. So let's start here. The good starting point for Unit is always the official website. Basically, anything you need to get started with NGINX Unit, no matter if it's an installation or a configuration, some tutorials and how-tos, is listed here on the website. So the latest release right now is version 1.19, which was released a couple of days ago, or at least 2 weeks ago. But we're continuously developing new features and releasing new features. So this is important information here. So if you're using Unit and you think there's anything missing, feel free to ask or reach out to us via GitHub or even via the mailing list, and let us know what's missing and let us know what you think about it. So first of all, I want to go through the key features of NGINX Unit briefly before we dive a little bit more into detail here. So many of you should know NGINX open source as our web proxy server, and NGINX Unit is our highly dynamically application server. Supported languages are listed in here. We will, as I said, we will cover a couple of them: Python, PHP, and JavaScript today. But beside from that, we are supporting assembly, Go, Perl, Ruby, and Java. It's configurable via a RESTful JSON API. That means there's a way of sending dynamically updates to an exposed API endpoint and configure NGINX Unit with an API. So there's not a need of having a static configuration file. So you can just update your application server settings, manage your application server by this API. As we said, we're supporting a lot of languages, different languages. And in our demos, you will see that we can run a Python application, a JavaScript application, and a PHP application alongside each other. So there's no need of spinning up different instances of NGINX Unit to host these different languages. You can host all of our supported languages on one unit engine if you want to. A very good feature we have here is that the application processes scale on demand based on traffic. And part of our demo will be the TLS support. So be posted for that one. This is something in the demo we will tackle is about the request routing, load balancing features, static file serving features. I will not go into detail here in theory because we will have a detailed demo about serving static files, doing load balancing, and request routing with some measures. These are new features for security reasons that we are not specifically going to in this webinar today, but feel free to check the docs. And if you have any questions about this features, about file system isolation, for example, feel free to ask. And another feature that we are not going into detail in this webinar here, but feel free to ask questions about it, is the proxying functionality of NGINX Unit. So that means you can use NGINX Unit as a proxy server and send requests or listen on a specific listener and send requests to a different application server or to another application running on Unit. Anything to add here, Valentin, at this point?
I'd like to answer the question that was asked in the chat. Actually, the Assembly support was a part of 1st April joke, but it's a real one because we provide a library with C API, so you can write application in any language that can call C functions. So, and it can be assembly. We don't support WebAssembly right now, but we are looking into it, and probably we will support it somewhere in the future.
All right. Just saw there was another question. Well, it's answered. About the security that we support for the API. This is something we will show in one of our demos. All right, so let's start with a basic installation part. So there are a couple of options we have when it comes to an installation of NGINX Unit. The easiest way, to be honest, is using the pre-built binaries and install NGINX Unit. If you want to install it on a VM, for example, we support for the different operating systems. For example, if you have a Ubuntu system or Debian-based system, there exist official repositories where you can get the latest builds from, the pre-built binaries. And this is the easiest way to install NGINX Unit on your VM, for example. Another option, and this is something we'll see in the demo, we have a Docker image or a couple of Docker images for NGINX Unit as well. So feel free to hack around with the Docker images available from Docker Hub. And if this is not like, if those pre-built binaries or the module support or anything like this is not fitting your needs, another option you have is you can build NGINX Unit from source, but this is something we will not do in this webinar, as it is an intro to Unit and how to install Unit, how to initially configure Unit, and building it from source, the Unit core as well as the Unit modules, the language modules, is something we will point out into another webinar. So if you're interested in how to build NGINX Unit from source, or furthermore, how to build the language modules for NGINX Unit for different versions from source, just place it in the chat and say yes, you're interested, and then we will, if there is a need on knowledge sharing, we are happy to create another webinar and dive into this building process a little bit in more detail. But as I said, let's go back to the official packages for Ubuntu, for example. Let me do this a little bit bigger. So as I said, Unit, the installation of Unit contains a couple of packages. The first thing we have to install is, let's say, the basic application server, which is apt install, in this case, Unit. And alongside with Unit, to run our applications in different languages on this application server, we have to install language modules. As you can see here, we have language modules for Go, for Java, Perl, PHP, Python, and Ruby. And one interesting part here is we mentioned something like Node.js or JavaScript at the beginning. And Go is another example here. Let's see. Yep. So the way of how we can deploy our applications into Unit is different per language. Let's say this. For PHP, for example, or Python, there are real modules. They are real Unit modules. They have a specific type. So this is something I can show you here. So this means this is the language module for PHP. But when we have a look on our JavaScript application, for example, here, there is a type external. We will not dive into detail here, but just to be aware of that for JavaScript and for Go, the way of interacting with the application itself or with the runtime environment for this application is different than for languages we have a module support for. So Go and JavaScript have this type external, which is different from like PHP or Python in this case, that you can see here. If you have specific questions about this one, feel free to paste it in the chat, but we will not go into very further detail about external modules versus an application module. This becomes interesting when we start building application modules from source. But we will go into detail about this JavaScript thing when we come to the demo. All right. So basically, as we said, the installation is as easy as it can be. Apt install Unit. And if you want to use Python 3.8 and PHP, for example, feel free to type apt install Unit, Unit PHP, Unit Python 3.8, or use the Docker image from Docker Hub. There are a couple of different Docker images. There's one with all languages. There is a minimal with no languages, just with a core. And there is per language like a dedicated Docker file. If you want to start with NGINX Unit and want to play a little bit around with it, I recommend to use the full image, for example, because with this you have the flexibility to use different languages, different versions, and just feel free to play a little bit around with. And in our example, we will use this Docker base image. So this is something we will definitely see in the next 45 minutes, how to use this Docker image. Is there any questions right now about the installation? How to install, or what's the best way of installing it? All right.
I believe you can continue, and
okay, perfect. All right, so let's imagine we have installed NGINX Unit. Then it will. This is basically if it's a Docker container, it will run in Docker. If it's if it's installed on a VM, for example, it will run as a service, for example. That means you can start the service. It's the same idea than for NGINX open source, for example, or Plus. It's a system service. You can start it. It will run. And per default, and this is the question about the security for the API, per default, if you do not change anything in the run command or during the installation part, Unit will create a socket, and the API is, like, if you want, protected by this socket. So this is, you can open the API to a TCP port. This will work as well. But the initial thing is this WebSocket, or the socket, sorry. And this is something I want to show you. So when you say curl -- Unix socket, and this one sits on the var run, there is the control socket of Unit, then you can do localhost / config, for example. So this is like, so don't be afraid. This is our demo configuration, so that's why there's a couple of stuff in here. But this is the default behavior. So that means as long as you're not exposing the socket to the outside world or reconfigure NGINX Unit to listen on a TCP port, let's say 8080, for example, it is tied to the local instance or to the inside of the container that you're able to call the NGINX Unit configuration API. But beside from that, NGINX Unit itself does not provide any other security, if you want, like password protection for the API endpoint or anything like this. It is possible to do so, like with an NGINX open source proxy in front of it. But in this scenario here, per default, the default installation is the socket, and you have to have access to the socket to be able to configure your NGINX Unit instance. So that's the initial idea. All right. All right. So as you saw, this is the initial idea: curl Unix socket. And if you do this, your application, it will be empty. It will be an empty object without any listener or upstream or routes or application. But this is the next thing we want to do here in our webinar. Go into detail about the different configuration objects we have in here. So let's start with the listener. So to be able to connect to your application or to your website, whatever, is to open a TCP port to be able to connect to. That's why we start here with a listener. In our case, in our scenario for our demos, we have a listener on port 8080, port 8081, 8000, 9000, 8090, and 8095. So this is the very first thing that we need, a listener, and this will expose a port to the outside world able to connect to. So inside of a listener, there is a path attribute, and this configuration directive path means, so if there is a request coming in on this port, what to do next or how to process this request. And in general, we have three different options here. We have a route, an application, or an upstream. And this should be pointed in here as well. But I think I will do this on the demo side because it's much easier to show you here what are the differences. So let's start with an easy example about the applications API. So this syntax means applications/API means that there is another configuration object called applications. So let's go a little bit further down to the application section. And in here, we have three different or a couple of different applications, make them a little smaller. We have WordPress and app 1, app 2, an API, and our Django Python project. So telling a listener to path the request to applications/ app1 or WordPress or API means that we will directly send the request to the application without doing anything else with it. This is the easiest way, to send traffic to your application. But in most of the cases, this isn't a really good thing, because you have to do some serve static files, for example, or protect your application. Say, I just want to allow get requests, not post, or I want to enforce HTTPS for the admin section, or do advanced configuration here. So, and therefore we have the route object. So let's make this is WordPress. So that means when we configure our listener for our WordPress application here, let's say port 8080 pass routes WordPress. So that means that NGINX Unit, the router process, will send the request coming on 8080 to the routing engine, and the routing engine has a configuration, in this case, this blog. Let's dive a little bit into it and see what we're doing here. So as you see, this routing blog contains, in general, has two different things. We have matches and actions on the highest level. A match is like the rule when to so if the rule matches, we invoke the action. So that means in this case, the match sits on the URI, and there are a couple of variables, and this is pointed on the website as well. This is something I want to show you. So all the variables we can use are listed here on the website. We will not go through this list because it's well explained in the matching in this table here. If you have any questions, again, feel free to ask here. So in this case, we're matching the part of the URI. So it means anything that ends with PHP or with PHP/something or WP admin will send to application WordPress direct. All right, fair enough. Let's have a look on this later. Another action is we specify a share directive here, and this is for sending static files to the browser. So that means any request that's not matching this rule set will automatically go in here, and that means we can share static files like JavaScript or CSS or HTML files, or as a fallback, we'll pass the request if it's not matching a given file, or we can't find the file, we will send the request as a fallback to this application. So this is basically the rule set in this route. If it's a PHP file or anything in WP admin, go to this application endpoint, WordPress direct. If it's a static file, share the file. If you can't find the file, use the fallback and send then the request to WordPress index. So now let's go in here and check what's in here. So the direct and index are basically two different targets of our application. And the direct means that it is actually a PHP file stored inside your web root directory. So for example, you have a hello world.php file in your WordPress directory. This will say, all right, there is a PHP file somewhere in my web root directory. So it will just be called. For example, let's see what we have here. Let's create one, p.php, and then type echo, hello world. So then do this localhost port, I think it was 8080. Was it 8080? No, it was 80. So hello world. So this is the So that means it matches the route and says, all right, it has a .php ending. So that's why we are in here. If there is a static file, like a JavaScript file, CSS file, it will try to share it. And if we can't find the file, we will automatically go in here. And the script directive here means that the request is not sent to a specific PHP file, but the request will automatically send to this index file. And then it's up to the application, in that case, WordPress, to handle the request and the parameter given here in the URL, like / something, or blog and post type or something along with WordPress. So this is our little demo application here. And that's basically how this route matching thing works. It is a way more complex than we can explain in 60 minutes or even in 20 minutes. So I would definitely recommend to check out the route section on the website and read it carefully. And again, if you have any questions about it, feel free to ask here or the mailing list or in the GitHub repository. You can, yeah, Valentin?
Actually, there is a question in the chat, and it's about running unit in production. Is NGINX is needed as a proxy for unit or not, and how to do this correctly, and about the documentation. So basically, you can run unit in production without NGINX because it's scalable. It can handle a lot of connections. It's asynchronous as NGINX, and it can just serve millions of connections, millions of requests at the same time, as well as NGINX does it. So basically, you don't need NGINX in front, but currently unit is quite limited in terms of features. So for example, we don't support HTTP2 right now. We have plans for it, but it's not supported. And in case if you need HTTP2, you probably need to use NGINX in front of unit, as well as some other features that if you need something that unit can't do right now, then you need NGINX in front. But basically, the main idea is that you can run unit in production and then you can put it public without any proxy layer. I believe Timo can add more because he has great experience running unit in production.
Right. So this one is off right now. I'm just searching for an application I have still up and running just with unit. But in general, you can definitely run NGINX Unit in production. I have a lot of experience with Node.js and PHP, and I've migrated most all of my workloads from PHP FPM to NGINX Unit. And with this route matchers and with the TLS and SSL support and the dynamic reconfiguration option of it, I will dive into this as later. It is absolutely possible to run your application just on unit, especially since the static files are part of the feature set. So for example, a PHP application is if you have a look inside our demo, again, you can run it completely standalone here. You create a listener, let's say on port 80, then you specify the TLS certificate. You can issue your certificate or get your certificates from Certbot, for example, and just upload it to your unit instance. Let me show you it's in there. All right, just change that. We'll show you this later. So then the certificate sits inside of the NGINX Unit configuration. So that means you can encrypt your site with TLS without having anything else in front of NGINX Unit. So yeah, it is absolutely possible. But as Valentin said, there are a couple of features and they're in the pipeline, but not developed yet. for example, the support of HTTP2 or like caching and stuff like that. So it is a time-to-time decision when it makes sense to host an application just on NGINX Unit and when it makes sense to have something in front of it. Yeah, but again, if you have any questions about a specific use case, feel free to ask. All right. So that means we covered the routes here. And this is the point I just talked about. You can encrypt your endpoint or your listener with a certificate. And I will show you this in a minute, how to do this and how this certificate stuff is working. Applications are covered, right, the upstreams object. This is a very, very new feature. And in this case, what we are doing here is we created an upstream with a given name, in this case, rr-lib. And this comes, or this has a list of servers. In this case, it's like an application or two different applications running on NGINX Unit. Just to introduce you the feature and how it works. So that means in this case, any traffic coming to port 9000 will be sent to the upstreams rr-lib configuration object. And in here, we specify two different servers with round robin as a load balancing method. And the server 8095, so at 2, has a weight of 0.5. So that means this is a little bit of a configuration for the round robin algorithm, how many requests we will send to this endpoint and how many requests we will send to the 8090 endpoint. And this is something we can show you in this demo as well. So let's type localhost port 9000. So this is application 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. So as you can see, recognize this by clicking refresh. We will see 2 times application 1 and 1 time application 2, and this is because of the configured weight of 0.5 in here. So there are a lot of more configuration options, and I will point you to our configuration as well. So feel free to see what different weights you can specify here. Valentin, just a question here, because I know there is a very good explanation about the weight directive on our NGINX documentation for open source. It's the same technique, isn't it?
Yeah, it's basically the same, but comparing to NGINX implementation, we also support rational weights, so you can specify 0.5, for example, if you just want to lower the weight twice.
Correct. Yeah, this is a good point. I just want to make this clear. On NGINX open source, the minimum weight is a full integer value, in this case 1, 2, 3, 10, 100. And with NGINX Unit, as Valentin said, there's the possibility to say 0.5, so to use like an decimal value as well. All right. So any questions right now about the initial configuration about listeners and what's happening with the request after hitting the listener, routes, applications, and upstreams? Okay. All right, can't see any. Cool. So that means at this point, we know a lot to create our first, or to run our first applications. All right, so as we saw, we have a couple of applications running here. So this is basically, let's use this as a first example because it's quite easy. It's, in this case, I mean, what we can do is we could get rid of the index here entirely. The only thing, because it's just an index PHP file, we could use this without the index option. But here you can see we have a language module, PHP. We have a run user for the application processes, a target. That means what's the web server root, what's the web root, and in this case, yeah, this is not needed here. So this is the easiest configuration for PHP. It's the same on the website. All the things you can use are well documented here as well. So it's like if you have a little bit of an experience with PHP FPM, this is the initial set of processes: a run user, the run group, and one of the interesting features with NGINX Unit is that you can change the behavior of your PHP runtime or of your application based on those options. And we did this with WordPress. So what you can do is you can specify an PHP ini file to send to your PHP runtime. And then you have two different options here. You can specify admin or user. And as we see here, well described, a user, or the user one is nothing you can change, are set in PHP ini mode, and this one may be updated by the runtime. And the admin values are set in the system, so the app can't change this, and the user is in ini mode, so you can change the values. That are the differences here. I prefer for something like those options, like the memory limit, variable order, use the environment, the globals, post, cookie, server, or expose PHP to tell the user what version of PHP are you using in the admin, so it's not editable from inside the application. But something like this, display errors, is something that's helpful that could be helpful to be changeable from inside your application code. But this is an interesting feature, so it means you can configure your application based on your unit configuration. And as the unit application server is configuring configurable with an API, you can specify the options without having a need of restarting your application server. So this is something we can try in a demo, for example. So here, let's do F12, then reload. Then we have our headers. And as you see, the powered by, so the PHP version is not shown in the response header. And I will use this demo as a little bit of an example how to work with the NGINX unit configuration. Let me make this a little bit bigger. So as the configuration here is based on different objects, we can access them just via the URI path. So localhost config will print out the whole configuration. Okay, good. So now we want to change something that sits inside of the WordPress application. So that means we can type applications. This will just give us our applications. So furthermore, we just want to do this with WordPress. So let's type WordPress. So it's just the WordPress. So now we want to see the options. So let's type options in here. It's getting closer. And we have the admin section. All right, cool. And at the very end, we have expose PHP, and this prints out 0. So as you see, with this URI path, you can really go to the deepest level and just change this one that you need. So that means you do not have the need of just uploading or reconfiguring your application server by sending a whole JSON payload. You can really go into the detail of your application and just change those values that's needed at this point. So that means what we do here, we specify the Unix socket, and then we say -x put. So this is important, it's not post, it's put for an update. And then we specify some data here, and I think we can do this and say 1. Oh, cool, reconfiguration done. So let's see the thing as well. Now it's set to 1. So let's reload. And as you see, this shows now X powered by PHP 7.3.19.1 Debian 10 U1. So as I said, this is a really good example. First, how to work with the API endpoints and how to change the configuration during runtime without having the need of restarting your application server or change any configuration file and re-upload or whatever. So let's change that back to 0 again, because we don't want to expose this to the outside world. Go in here, say then, right, 0, reconfiguration done, reload the page, and it should be gone. Yep. All right. All right, so summarization with options here for PHP, you can configure your runtime environment, and with the URI, you can just go down the path and go to this point where you want to, change any settings. And just make sure if you have a JSON object like this one here, make sure if you want to change this entirely, that you send those curlies with it, or an invalid JSON payload in this case. If it's a single value, it's totally fine to do it that way, but make sure it's a string, as I showed you here, as integer here is not supported. Okay, good. All right, so admin options. So let's go into a little bit in the detail in JavaScript just to see this. We remember one thing, that on the listener there was this little TLS certificate thing, and let me see if the certificate is right now in here, because we changed something. Let's do the Django thing first. Yeah, we do the Python demo first. Where is the Django app? Yes. So here we have deployed a little Django Python application. It's listening on port 8000. This one here. So this is a good example, as we told you earlier in this webinar. It is totally possible to run multiple languages on the same unit instance. So in this case, when let's do curl yeah, it's Django, and let's see. Let's go in here. It's just a small demo app. One thing to mention here is this one is your application path. Then the module is your web server gateway interface. in here. Then with the environment directive, you can specify some environment variables to be set inside of your application context. And yeah, we saw earlier that Django project or this Django application was in the listener just said, all right, go to application Django project here. And right before the webinar, we changed that because we had some interesting CSS problems. So what we did here is to make it a little bit more pretty for you here, and to make this a little bit more colorful, we installed the static files for Django. And as we saw earlier, in case we need to change the behavior of a request based on this case, if it's a static file or not, we have to introduce a route and a corresponding matcher. And that was what we did here. We created a Django route, and we say, all right, anything that goes in static is a static file. So please share the file that's located in var app home python static. And if it's not a static file, so it means it can't be found or it's not static in the URI, send the request to our application directly. So that's what we just recently did before the webinar. So that's why this thing is now a little bit more colorful than it was before. So this one goes directly to the application, and oops, the admin thing goes to the application, but all the static files like CSS, JavaScript, and all the things goes to the static folder and will be served then from unit without going into the application logic. All right. So now I want to show you the TLS support, but as we change this one here, I just have to make sure that this one is re-uploaded. So what you need to enable TLS on your application server is a certificate in a PEM format. So that it's a combination of your key and the cert in one file. And now I want to show you a really cool feature when you work with Docker and NGINX Unit, because most of the time what you want to do is when you have a Docker image or a Docker container, you want to initialize your application and something just at startup. So you want to do this wherever, like uploading certificates, do some initial configuration, or do some additional logic. And with the newest version of NGINX Unit and described in here, I'll show you this here. Inside of the default NGINX Unit container, there is a directory called docker entry.d, and it's also described when you work here with installation Docker images. This is something that's absolutely cool and worth to read it, because in this case, what we do is we upload a PEM file into the docker entry.d directory alongside with our initial unit configuration. And as soon as the container starts up, we have an docker entry point shell script, or the logic inside the container will go inside of the docker entry.d directory, and we'll say, hey, cool, there's a PEM file, so that's a certificate, and we'll automatically send the necessary API request to the unit API to enable the certificate in unit. And to show you this, I will build this right now because this is, I think, the best option. And in the meantime, I will talk a little bit more about it, because as we saw, the certificate was not part of the unit configuration as we saw earlier. And that's why I will just build this right now from source again. So my Docker file. And while this is running, I will explain you a little bit more about the Docker file here. So as I told you earlier, we have this version 1.19 full. That means it's with all the language modules pre-installed. And what I did here is, and this is the thing, it's totally up to you, to add additional software in here. For example, if you run a PHP application, or in this case Python, and you need pip, or you need something like Django in the container, feel free to add a run command here and add anything you need. For example, PHP 7.3 MySQL, or the libgd support for grabbing images and stuff. Well, this is absolutely up to you. Or in this case, install Django for your Python application, or the WordPress CLI. Another thing we have here is, if you want to see the access logs from your applications, there is another object here that's access log, and it's sent to a specific file, in this case var log access log. And what we do in the container is we're linking this access log to the std out. So as soon as the container finished building, I will tail the Docker logs. So that means we can see any access on a unit application inside of our Docker standard output. So this is absolutely cool and helpful thing when it comes for access logging. Right. So this one is still building. It takes a little bit of a time because it's my development environment and I'm adding a lot of different things here. So what the cool feature we should see as soon as it finished building is that we copied the PEM file that sits in our dev environment here into our Docker entry point D directory. So NGINX Unit will automatically include this PEM file into the configuration, so ready to use. So it will be done in a minute. It's installing Django. Right after Django, it will be there you go. All right. So now let's go inside of the container again to check what's in there. First of all, let's have a quick look in the Docker entry point. So we have the bundle PEM file and our initial configuration .unit.conf.json. And we do a curl with our Unix socket, or run control sock on localhost. Go on the very top. This has now the certificate included. You can manage your certificates with the Unit API as well, but I think this is a very, very easy way of pre-configure your NGINX Unit instance and include certificates because you don't have the need of send the API commands to configure this. And as the certificate has a name, bundle, and we have this configuration here that says localhost port 8081 is secured by this certificate. Let's try HTTPS. This should be 85. Hello unit. Cool. This is API planets. Right, and this TLS support is also mentioned here on the configuration, SSL certificate. Create the PEM file, upload the PEM file, and make sure, in this case, as the certificate sits outside of the configuration object, make sure to say localhost/certificates instead of localhost/config/certificates, for example. This is a common mistake. So certificate sits outside of the configuration object. And yeah, as I said, you can upload your certificates manually, or if you use Docker, for example, you are absolutely free to use the Docker entry point way of managing your certificates, as this is a very easy way of doing it. So any questions about TLS termination, certificate handling at this point? All right. Oh, good. So then let's go back in here. And as a couple of final words. So installation section about installation configuration covers exactly this, what we see in the demos. Another very helpful thing is the how-to section, and it's split it up into two different parts. One is app framework, like Cake PHP or Express or Django. So our Node.js API for the planets is Express, for example. Django was for Python, or I built a couple of applications based on Cake PHP. So this is a good example because this shows you exactly how to configure your NGINX Unit application server to work as an application server for your application built on a specific framework. Or another thing could be if you have something like WordPress, which is here. So that means you can then just follow the tutorial here, and this will guide you how to set up NGINX Unit to work as an application server for your PHP-based WordPress site. And information here, if you think that anything is missing here, or in case you used NGINX Unit for a different framework or for another application that's not listed on the documentation website, feel free to send us your configuration or reach out to us via GitHub or the mailing list, and we are happy to add some additional applications or app frameworks here. All right. Any questions right now about NGINX Unit in general? All right, that was just the question documentation for using port 80 and 443 with InsertBot would be helpful. I think we'll talk after the webinar about it, and so be posted and just check the unit.nginx.org site, and we'll talk about this and upload an example.
Yeah, sure. I will reach our technical writer to probably write a how-to about it. I think it makes sense. Yeah.
All right. More questions? All right, looks good at this point. So again, if you have any questions outside of this webinar, there's a GitHub repository as well as a mailing list. It's all mentioned on the unit.nginx.org website. So feel free to reach out to us with any question about anything Unit is. And yeah, so then from our side, thanks for joining our webinar, and let us know your questions, your thoughts, and what could be interesting for the future. And we will be happy to host another webinar.
Yes, thank you for joining us. And if you have any questions, you can always reach us via GitHub or mailing lists, and we will be happy to answer.